I'm Evelyn Gleason from Teach New York, and you're listening to Ed Up Accelerated Excellence.
Leaders, entrepreneurs, and change agents looking for the opportunity to network and exchange ideas with other trailblazers and to further your brand. The 2.0 conference is for you. Experts from the fields of education, health, internet, marketing, and CXO are welcome to take part in the 2025 conference in Las Vegas, March 4th through 6th. Reserve your space today and receive a 10% discount courtesy of EdUp Accelerated Excellence with the code EdUpXE10OFF. That's EdUpXE10OFF. Learn more and register online at www.the2conf.com. That's the2conf.com with the code EdUpXE10OFF.
Welcome back to Ed Up Accelerated Excellence, the podcast for the advancement of educational effectiveness and equity. And I'm your host, Jacob Easley II, PhD, PMP. And we have an outstanding guest who will talk about a topic you usually don't hear about in education, and that is architecture. So I'm going to have our guest introduce himself and tell us where he's from and his affiliation. So Brent, will you introduce yourself to the EdUp Accelerated Excellence community?
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. My name is Brent Miller. I work for a firm called HED out of our LA office. We have multiple offices throughout the U.S. And from LA, I'm the managing principal for our National Higher Education Studio. I've been in education realm for about 26 years at this point.
So Brent, welcome to the show. Thank you for that. So we're going to jump right in with, I'm chomping at the bit because this topic is so interesting to me. What initially drew you to architecture, and how did your philosophy around designing educational spaces evolve?
Great question. So I am one of those individuals that actually has a father who's an architect. And so we'd go on family vacations, and we found ourselves mostly touring buildings, right, on our vacations. And what I thought was really interesting is that what I learned about kind of materiality is that my father was always going around and like banging and kind of tapping on different materials on buildings with his wedding ring, kind of listen to, the reverberation to see really what type it was. I just thought it was really fascinating. And so it was a real passion for me to see him do that, and it really created a passion for me in the built environment and around construction. And then the second part of, philosophy, interesting. So to me, it kind of goes back to a lot of the research that's occurred in the educational space. All right, so you go back to the 70s and Walter Barbie and the research on learning modalities, right? This was a big change really in designing educational facilities, or how that could change the designing of them, and how that really focused on, visual, auditory, and kinetic modalities. And then there's an update to that research in the late 80s from Neil Fleming, and he really took that original Walter Barbie model and expanded it to really describing 4 types of learning, right, and learners, with it being visual, auditory, reading, writing, and then kinesthetics. And this really led us to understand that, if we're going to design for students, now that we understand how they learn, how are we going to design these spaces differently to really help students engage in education. And so for me, there's a couple tipping points that I look at relative to how this changes occurs and where we saw it. So you take a classroom, for example, what's been a traditional lecture hall, and we're starting to replace those with what we call active learning environments, right? These are really designed for collaborative, hands-on activities. Usually these spaces, flexible furniture, interactive whiteboards, integrated technology, really allowing students to learn in different modalities throughout a single lecture or throughout multiple days. And I know we don't have a lot of visuals here, but I could encourage maybe some of your listeners to go out and look up at the University of Michigan, the Ruffin Center classroom building. This is one we completed a few years ago. And we did several different classroom types, but one of them that's really interesting is the classroom in the round. So it's a 190-seat lecture hall, but in the round, surrounded a 360-degree screen, 4 foot tall, 42 feet long. circular all the way around the room. There's 5 rows of students with really instruction space in the center, but what allows the instructor to do is to kind of walk around the space anywhere they are, and there's really isn't necessarily a center, right? That center moves, and there's really a lot of intimacy between that instructor and then the community of students because of the access the instructor has to easily move throughout the spaces. That's really interesting. And then if you kind of look at something that hasn't traditionally been looked at as really, an educational component is what we're learning really has an incredible impact on student success, which is really student housing, right? So we're seeing a lot of impacts in student housing, really the development and rise of the living learning communities, really blur the line between, academic and residential. And it's really, understanding that, student housing isn't just a place for students to sleep anymore, right? But it's really a key socialization component and community building to really improve retention and well-being and academic success overall. So that's just some of the things that I've seen over the past years where it really guides us and some examples of where that philosophy is used.
Well, that's really amazing. I got to tell you, because when you were talking about this first example I thought about theater in the round.
Sure.
So a very a space that sort of equalizes access to the instructor or instruction, because everyone is, in a sense, sort of facing one another as learners, holding each other accountable. So that kind of speaks to how art has, in some ways, influenced this educational space. So you've worked on projects like the Guggenheim Museum, is that correct?
No, that's right. So before I was at HED, I worked at Frank Gehry's office here in Los Angeles for about 5 years, right? And Guggenheim was one of my main projects when I was with the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. But I also worked on the Walt Disney Concert Hall, the Music Experience project up in Seattle, and a couple other ones. But yeah, it was a great experience.
So tapping and touching on the wall and working on these type of, I would say, architectural spaces that are art installations in and of themselves, particularly for aesthetically, but also for engagement of visitors. How would you say that has shaped the way you think about architecture and education, using building off of this sort of theater in and around approach?
Sure. I think for me that process at Frank's office was more about developing a process, right? A real rigor, right? For really exploring design and some of those spatial relationships that you have, and really the use of a three-dimensional exploration. So for me, we were actually in LA the first HED office to have a model shop, right? And that was really comes out of that belief in exploration in the physical really leads to great results in the design field. So we do a lot of modeling in our office, really try to understand not only the exterior, but the interior spaces and what those relationships are that students will have to themselves and just the other spaces that we try to create.
So, I've worked on universities, and I've worked with the master plan of building out a campus. I wasn't the lead, but I worked on that plan and worked with architectures to redesign some existing buildings and building or laying out the design for new buildings. What are the type of questions that you begin with when you work with universities or other educational organizations to think about architecting or building out educational learning spaces?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for us, it's once again, it's a little bit about process, right? We know that when we're working with educators and administrators, right, architecture and master planning is not their day jobs, right? And so they're really smart about what they do on the campuses, but that's not really. But architecture isn't necessarily, their focus. And so what we like to do is to make sure that we're providing opportunities for them to engage in an understanding of the project at a level that they can really get engaged. And it really kind of comes back again to that three-dimensional factor and say renderings, right? So it's challenging for some administrators to understand, say, a site plan that's flat in 2D, right? It's just hard to understand what that relationships are in the scale. So once again, we try to bring it back into the physical form in models that have scales and relationships to things that they understand with buildings that they have already on campus, that they're making decisions really based on good quality information, right, that they have. And so what we don't want to have is for us to design a project, have it built on campus, and for owners to say, that's not what I thought I was getting, right? So we really try to bring them along in a way that they can understand what it is and what the building that they're getting will be.
So I am now a university president or academic lead. And I may not know exactly what I want. I know I want a nice building. We have money. It's been, there's some funding.
Sure.
Typically, what do you find to be some of the common concerns or common questions that other university or higher ed individuals bring to the table when they begin to work with you to build out spaces?
Sure. And it's a good question, right? So what we find, once again, it depends on who your constituent actually is for this, but there's always the concern about budget and schedule, right? And how are you going to maintain, both of those within their process? Because institutions usually have limited funds, right? And they have academic schedules to retain and maintain. And so it's always, they always want to know how we can maintain budget, right? What processes do we have in place? And so we have a variety of processes that we use, working with the cost estimator, not just doing estimating at the end of, say, phases, but more of a weekly update. And when we ask owners to make decisions, we always use cost within that decision-making process, right? Because if you kind of hold out do you want X or do you want the Y, and not explain what the cost differences are between them, they may be making an uninformed decision, right? So we always like to have costs go along with that. And the next thing is really, how do we maintain schedule, right? Because they've got students showing up in the fall, and whether it's an academic building or student housing, they're going to need to put those students somewhere because they've promised that to the students. And so we have a process to where we make sure that we are hitting all of our milestones with our clients, and that we're not spending a lot of time backstepping and making sure that we don't have to go back and redo things because we didn't understand what it was in the first place. And so that kind of comes back to understanding the goals and vision at the beginning to really reduce that backup time and redo work.
Experts from the fields of education, health, internet, marketing, and CXO are welcome to take part in the 2025 2.0 conference in Las Vegas, March 4th through 6th. Reserve your space today and receive a 10% discount courtesy of EDUP Accelerated Excellence with the code EDUPXE10OFF. That's EDUPXE10OFF. Learn more and register online at www.the2canf.com. That's the2canf.com. with the code EDUPXE10OFF.
So thinking about, you mentioned this notion of housing, but I'm thinking about student life.
Yeah.
We know that, particularly at the undergraduate environment, there's a huge focus on the integration of student life within the academic context and for the academic experience around well-being, inclusion, high engagement. So what makes student life projects unique compared to other architectural endeavors from your perspective?
Sure. So I've got a real passion about student housing because I think it is one of those projects that has such a significant impact on student success, right? And so there's actually been research done on this. So when you look at retention rates, students that do live on campus and in appropriate buildings that really allow you to develop communities, they have a 10 to 20% higher rate of retention, right, than peers that didn't participate in that. And then that continues out through graduation. So students who once again live on campus in housing that helps them develop communities and relationships, that graduate rates are 10 to 50% higher, right, than those that really don't participate in that, right? So we've developed a process for designing and planning student housing really based on appropriate scales of communities, right? That really foster relationships and a sense of belonging, for these students. And for us, it really starts. The first scale is really the bedroom itself, right? What you find in student housing is the bedrooms, are about 80% of the total building square footage, and so you want to make sure you get it right. And so, and then that's really that first level of connection that those students have is with their roommates, right? So you want to make sure that that's done correctly. And then we look at that next larger scale, which we call the neighborhood, right? And the neighborhood is really, 30 to 50 students, depending on the institution. They're usually guided by, a resident advisor, right? That's on the floor with them, and then supported by spaces such as study rooms, some smaller lounge, type spaces. And then we look at knitting those neighborhoods together, right? So you may have multiple neighborhoods on a floor, and we look for creating spaces that allow for interactions then for those two larger groups. So we look at spaces like community kitchens, for example, where students could get together, they could cook a dinner together and dine together, or larger lounge spaces so you can have, Monday night football or, whatever you want to have on the TV. It really brings students together and creates a sense of belonging within that. And then we look at the entire building and we call it the community, right? The entire community should also have a sense of belonging because they belong to that housing community. And so we look at amenity spaces like, fitness rooms and dining halls and classrooms. And then for us, we have a thing called the lobby lounge, right? So this is really at the base of the building, right, where an elevator would come down and stairs come down. And you'd find that this is where students say, listen, I'll meet you down in the lobby lounge, right, for dinner at 5:00, right? And it's really a casual space with lots of different types of seating, from lounge seating to, for groups, and, individuals can sit by themselves, but really creating this sense of community for people to interact, to casually, interact with people, to purposely interact with people, but really creating those spaces, to allow that development of community.
So I'm smiling, and there's a reason why I'm smiling, because as you're describing this sort of learning environment of housing, it really is a 21st century design, because I'm thinking back to when I lived on campus. We didn't use the words bedroom, but we did use the word lobby. So that was the one word that was very, very, very familiar. And we did not have in our dorm, we call it a dormitory.
Right.
We didn't have a kitchen or shared sort of facilities for cooking. So a lot has changed over time. But I really like those stats about student retention for those who happen to live on campus. So one of the big issues now are within higher education, particularly around the design of buildings, is sustainability.
Sure.
And sort of the notion of being, I believe it's LEED efficient or LEED recognized. Can you describe your approach around sustainability in that regard?
Sure. Yeah. And so for your listeners, LEED is actually a way to track your progress on a sustainable goal, right? I think the important thing is that you design in a sustainable manner, and whether you get the LEED, award on your wall or not is something that, owners can decide if they want to do. But it's all, the goal is really to reduce our carbon footprint, right? And we've got significant challenges, within that right now with global warming. So when you look at the construction industry, we're responsible for about 38% of the global CO2 emissions, right? And you can't ignore that, right? Architecture is going to have to play a role in really how we reduce the impacts to global warming and our CO2 footprint, our carbon footprint, that's out there. And so our firm has done several things, right? One is that we've already signed on to the 2030 commitment, right? This is a goal and a commitment by HED to aim for net zero energy on our buildings by 2030, right? If we can make that, and it's coming up quick, right? But that's the goal. Then there's a large number of firms out there that have kind of signed on to this commitment. The other one is MEP 2040 channels. This is our 2040 challenge. This is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. This is really also about reducing our operational carbon, right, within that mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems with the goal of net zero by 2040. So HED is in a unique position because we are an integrated practice. So we're not just architects, we're architects and engineers. So we've really developed a system of working very closely together with the goal of reducing our carbon footprint within each building. And so we work very close together with our engineers up front to make sure that our initial designs that we're producing and those initial design decisions we're making have the best approach to reducing our carbon footprint. So work with those engineers to make sure that we're reducing sun angles into the building, that we are looking at other site capacity issues that really do help us reduce that carbon footprint. And it's a goal we've all taken. It's a very large one that we have to really come together with and try to solve.
Yeah, that's really amazing. One of my passions or hobbies to think about from a psychological perspective is how does space itself, and I'm going back to your sort of design for what we now might call student housing. And I think about how does space propel or facilitate us learning. So you gave an example of in the realm, we're talking about efficiency. So I'm wondering, how does that space help to nurture a sense of sustainability for students? And this is living on campus, not necessarily in the traditional classroom space that you guys are designing, but sustainability, but also learning within that environment. So if you could address one or both of those, how does the space itself help to foster a sense of sustainability or sustainability education for students, and perhaps even learning for students beyond sustainability?
Yeah, so we have a philosophy called environment on display, right? And so we look for those opportunities within a building to put those sustainable factors on display, right? Whether that's photovoltaic panels, right, that we maybe don't hide on a roof, but we maybe create a canopy out in front of the building, right? So students can really see what we're trying to accomplish. If there's certain aspects of the MEP systems on the inside of the building, we try to highlight that for the students so they understand. I mean, students these days, they're very concerned, right, with their carbon footprint and sustainability. We know that they want to know that a university also is interested in that and has that as a goal and want to know that their buildings are being built sustainable. And so we've even gone to the point where we have developed in the lobbies sustainable dashboards, right? So a student in real time can actually see how their building is performing. So they participate in, did I turn my lights out when I left the room, right? Did I, how can I reduce my carbon footprint? And so it's a way to get them engaged in that process. So we're both trying to achieve the same goals.
Oh, I love it. The sustainability dashboard. So that really is a learning living space, but at the same time, it's an engagement where now we have a sense of accountability. And I would say you can develop a sense of pride for the outcomes that you might achieve with that building.
And just imagine, so I've seen it, I'm sorry, so I've seen it where you've got two student housing projects. Actually, they try to outdo each other on who can have the lower carbon footprint, right? And it's great, right?
Yeah, you just took the words right out of my mouth. I can envision this sort of competition between two different housing communities on who has the best results. And of course, you could incentivize that at the administrative level, if you wanted to. So this sounds like with these new designs for housing spaces, they are a means to foster learning. But can you talk about perhaps some of the significant trends shaping the future of higher education on campuses, particularly around STEM and career focus for students? So if a student were thinking about how to further engage in sustainability, or even thinking about the architecture on their campus, how would a student then engage in this work?
Yeah, so it's interesting because what we're seeing is a change in STEM, not only in the understanding of the relationships of those different disciplines, but really going back a little bit to more hands-on, right, versus the digital, right, or really a combination of both together. And so in these facilities, we're now seeing real integration with makerspaces, right? They really use hands-on problem solving. It really fosters innovation and career readiness. I think a good example of this is we just finished up a project at USC called the Iovine and Young Academy, and that the Young is Andre Young, otherwise known as Dr. Dre, right? And so they really came up with this vision for the project, really based on a new learning component, which is called challenge-based reflective learning, which really is a finished component of this academy that they've asked to have built at USC. And it really allows students to develop skills and knowledge between, design, technology, business and communications, to bring together, tangible prototypes that they can make in their maker spaces for fabrication. They've got 3D printing, CNC milling machines, podcast studios, mixed reality studios. So all of these are now coming together within single facilities to let students engage in the development of ideas at a level that they haven't been able to in the past. And so I think that's really where STEM is going now.
Yeah, the makerspace, those are growing in, I would say they're becoming more common space in education, often though they usually are tied to, I think perhaps, I'm not sure they originated, but I've often seen them associated with entrepreneurism and the business program side of the house. But I can see how that could tie into STEM and even STEAM to include the arts as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So is there a particular project that comes to mind that you would say you're most proud of if you had to choose one? I know you're proud of all of your projects. And if so, why? And particularly in the space around how it buttresses or bumps up against education and learning.
Yeah. So, I'm proud of all the work that we do at HED and within the higher education arena and otherwise. But for me, I think one of the more complex projects we've done is the USC Village, right? And this is a project that was the largest privately owned university project in North America. This opened up about 8 years ago at this point, so we've been able to do some research on how successful it's been. But it's when I say village, it truly is that. So it's adjacent and just north of the main USC campus. But this is a 12-acre renovation. Well, not renovation. It's a 12-acre new development for the university. It's 2,500 beds. It's about 1.1 million square feet, about $750 million project. It includes 100,000 square feet of retail space and multiple courtyards and some large tenants that are in the space. And so the challenge was really, how do you develop what really was part of the specific plan agreement between USC and Los Angeles, that it isn't just only for USC students. It really is a public facility. And so what you have on the ground floor are public retail spaces, including, say, like a Trader Joe's and a Target, and then lots of mom and pop shops and food and dining throughout the facility. And so how do you create a space that allows, the public and students to interact in a university facility in a very successful manner? And when you go there these days, it is a thriving, exciting, plaza ground level, experience, with all these groups interacting, together. And what we found is that the facility, the project isn't just used by the 2,500 students that live there. You get thousands of students coming in from the main campus, really seeing that as a significant part of their program, to interact with, whether it's coming over there for lunch or they have programs in our large plaza. But it's made up of 7 buildings, right? So there's 6 large housing projects, all within courtyards and so forth. There's um, and it's interconnected in design, so it connects directly into the main university. So you don't really know there's a disconnect between the major pedestrian walkways, between main campus and the north. And that, to me, just going back there and seeing the interaction between everybody there and the energy is what really makes me proud, and to see it as a very successful project.
When you think about university admissions, a lot of folks have focused on, one is housing and 2 are the commons. And the common is the common area or student union. How what effect have you seen at USC, University of Southern California, this new sort of development? What impact has it had on enrollment and perhaps even retention that you can speak to?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers on retention, so mine is a little more anecdotal, right? That when we go and we talk to students, or we hear back from our clients, is that it's really been, I would say, 99% positive, right? In the student experience that's there, in the academic experience, because they do have classrooms there, and in the administrative experience. I do know, and this may go to it, is that basically when they open the housing, it usually sells out in about 6 hours, right? So it just goes to show you how successful and how desired those units are, and that experience is among the student population.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Sell out in 6 hours. It's like concert tickets, right?
That's right. Exactly.
So you're the senior architect and you are a senior architect and managing principal. I'm going to shift gears with this one. So how do you mentor young architects entering the field, and what advice do you wish you had received early on in your career?
Yeah. I'm going to give you something a little bit more general, and it's a little bit more of a philosophy, right? Because every young architect engineer is different, right? But and I kind of have this saying, with my daughter, right, which is don't be perfect, be brave, right? Take those chances where you can when they're given to you, and ultimately see where it takes you, right? Because they may not come around again. And you may feel like, it's over your head and you don't have the skills to do it. But I would encourage everyone to believe that they do have the abilities to go beyond, their limitations, right? And be better, and see where that takes them. So I would give that advice to anybody.
Oh, that's brilliant. So be brave. You don't have to be perfect, but you should be brave.
Yeah.
And I think
take that chance.
I think that also speaks to being resilient at the same time. So if you don't do well, how do you continue to remain brave and move forward? I do think that many folks get caught up in the trappings of being perfect.
I would agree. I'd also make the suggestion that they do look for a mentor, right, within their firm, their practice, within their community. I think always having someone to ask their opinions about, so you're not out there on your own, is always a positive experience.
Yeah, and actually that's a lifelong goal. I don't think we ever outgrow mentorship.
Right. Agreed.
Even when you become a mentor, Because if you're brave, you're going to always find new projects, and each new project is a new challenge.
Exactly.
So if you had to, from the ground up, think about an educational space in your dream of dreams of space, what would be 2 or 3 considerations you would put to the fore?
So let me answer it maybe a little differently than what you're expecting. So I actually like having some boundaries around what we're trying to accomplish, right? Because I do think that allows us to be more ingenuitive, right?
Mm-hmm.
As we look at solving, the challenges that we have with our clients, right? So we know they don't have unlimited resources, right? And so, really looking for, great designers role of balancing, all parts of a project, including, budget and program, right? And how creative can you be to get to that result within that? I think that's really what makes, great design to me. I think that is so much more fulfilling than kind of this unlimited, budget and scope and schedule that one might throw out there. But the goal being the same, in that if we could really create a space that allows a student to be successful, really develop relationships on campus, be academic successful, and give them the basis and foundation to move into the professional world, that'd be great. That's really our goal.
Yeah, I like that. I think that constraint, and this is all project management really, but the budget constraint does put a significant amount of pressure on us to be a bit innovative.
Yes.
So if you think about it, I had a professor in college, English course, English composition, I believe. And with each paper, she would reduce the number of words we could use. So the fewer words, the more precise your articulation had to be. And that was her design. She explained that the fewer words you have, the more precise you have to be in what it is you want to say. And so it
Agreed.
forces you to be able to make a bold statement within this very restricted sort of environment. So I think that's a challenge I think that's a challenge beyond just architecture, but in education in general. When you have a limited budget, how can you still shoot for the stars and aim for success and to be innovative in that approach?
Absolutely.
So I want to ask you, as we begin to close out, how could the EdUp Accelerated Excellence community engage with your work? You've talked about your work with Guggenheim at University of Southern California and some other projects. But what's next for you, and how might the audience engage with you?
Sure. Well, I think it's. I know that with this medium, right, there's not much in the way of visual we can provide, but I do use a couple names of projects, right, that if they are interested, I think they can Google those and kind of see, visually what I'm referring to, on those projects. Our HED website allows people to reach out to me if they have any additional questions or want to get more insight, and if they just want to see more educational projects that we're working on that maybe I haven't talked about today, our website is a really good place to do that.
And can you state the website for us?
It's hed.design.
HED.design.
Yeah.
Excellent. So HED.design. And last word. If I were an educational organization looking to partner with Brent Miller at HED, what would make you stand out from all other architects?
For me, maybe it's the passion I have for the student itself, right? That's really my goal. When we approach a project, we're not looking to necessarily win an award, right? Sometimes it comes out, and that's fine, right? But ultimately, really, the goal for us is to help the student meet their goals at that educational facility, right? At a university, a college, a community college. How can we help students be successful in their academic careers so they can go out and take that next step in the professional arena, right? And start to make those impacts in the world that we know they can. So if we can be a part of that process to help that student achieve their goals, that's really what our vision is in every project that we develop.
So Brent, I want to thank you so much for this time and this opportunity to learn with and from you here at EdUp Accelerated Excellence.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
A special thanks to our research assistant for this episode, Emily Bloom, graduate student researcher at Fordham University, studying in the Mental Health Counseling program. And we want to hear from you. If you have feedback on this or other episodes, contact us online at edupxe.com, that's edupxe.com.
Thank you for engaging with EdUp Accelerated Excellence, a member of the EdUp Experience network of educational podcasts. You can find this and other episodes on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Radio. If you like this episode, don't forget to follow and share within your network.